Okay. So we looked at all the requirements. We looked at the different test cases and test scenario type. What we're going to dive into starting today is how do you go about writing the test case, right? What's the process? If somebody gives you a requirement, how do you come to conclusion of what needs to be tested and what additional details you need to capture it? Remember we talked about it, the design, strategy planning and design phase in STLC, that we need to start figuring it out, what step-by-step instruction we're going to do it, what kind of testing we're going to do it. Okay. So let me walk you guys through a template that what a test case looks like, and then we'll dive into detail and just how do we go about coming to what do we need to write in each one of these things. Okay. So hopefully all of you had an opportunity to read through the requirements document a couple of times over the last week or so that we can start drilling it down into things. So what you're going to see here is essentially a template that allows you to capture certain information. Now, there are multiple ways. If you're like it's using some tools like Azure DevOps or Jira, then they will have, and we'll show you as we go progress toward the session, how you can write the same information. So think about it. This one is, if you don't have any of those tools, how would you capture the information? That's what this template is about. So depending on the company that you're using it, or you might be working on a project, they may have sophisticated tool and some may not have tools. So if you don't have the tools, then this is the level of information you need to capture. And you will see it. A lot of this information maps to when we start getting into the tools, exactly more or less same way. Okay. So think about it for a given system, right? Similar to our Flon. You're going to have probably a few hundred test cases, right? So you need to figure out a mechanism to say, hey, how do I kind of organize all of my test cases and work? At the same time, you may have multiple projects going on in a company, right? So you always start with, hey, what project it's you're working for? And remember, we said a lot of times it's functional modules. The system is going to be broken down into multiple pieces. So you can have additional details. Hey, this for this project, for this modules, and so on. Then there's going to be some, what I call it as a metadata information, which talks about who is designing tests, when you did originally, what is the current version, when you run it, when did you run, who ran it, that kind of information. Then you're going to have the priority. Remember, one of the things we talked about is, as a risk contingency planning, we need to figure it out. Hey, if I have to eliminate certain tests and I can run only few, which few should I run it? So you always define priority for all the test cases. So that's what this priority goes in. Then the test case number is essentially, if you think about its filing mechanism, right? A lot of times, if you're using some tools, it'll auto-generate those things. But if you're doing it manually, you may just want to refer a number. Say, hey, this is test case number XYZ type of thing. Then, obviously, we all are human, right? We can't just decrypt the number, and it's harder for us to remember the number. So if you put the English name, it's much more easier to, oh, this is what it means, right? So you can relate it. Then you talk about the precondition. So if you recall it, when we talk about writing a good test case, right? We talked about it has to have three things, right? What is going to be my inputs? What should be the state of the system? And what are expected behaviors, right? So if you think about it, the state of the system, what should be true in the system, it's nothing but a precondition before you can run the test case, right? So this precondition essentially gives you a place to put information about what it should be true in the system before you can run those things. Okay. Then there is going to be dependency. So if you're like it's dependent on some external systems to do certain things, then you can put those dependencies. Typically, those are external. So in the example that we talked about, the Amazon ordering, test case or scenario that we talked about, right? In order to do an ordering, right, you may have to have a dependency to your payment gateways because that's what's collected, right? It's not part of your system. You're going to go somewhere out, make those calls. So your dependency is always, if the payment gateway is not up, you can't do a purchase, right? Because you cannot make a payment. Then you can always put an English description of the summary. So a couple of sentences so people can understand what is the intent of this test cases. Then you get into what we call as test script or step-by-step instructions. So whenever you're performing a test, you're going to do 5, 6, 7 different things, right? So this tells you what are those 7 things and what is the sequence for those 7 things. And then whenever you do certain things, what is the expected result? So this is the third piece that we talked about in test case, expected behavior. What should be that behavior? Okay. And then when you actually run the test case, you want to record it, the actual result, so you can compare it. Did I get the result and expected behavior? Are they same? If they are same, then you know that, hey, functionality works. If they are different, then you know the system, it's not behaving the same expected behavior. So that's when you open the defects. That's when you open the bugs. Okay. Then in order to run a test, right, you need certain pieces of data. So you will identify all the data aspects of it. Then the post condition tells you that if you successfully run the test case, what should be the state of the system? Okay. So what happens post the execution of test case is you will capture here. And the status is essentially like it's, hey, what is the current status of this test case? Is it planned, it's executed, it's failed, is it needs to be rerun, those kind of things. Okay, so that's essentially a template, the pieces of information you needed every time you write some test cases. Okay, so yes.
Precondition. Precondition, is it what the tester have in mind or the company have in mind?
So precondition is what should be the state of the system before you run the test case. And we'll talk through it in a moment as we go through it, right? What are the conditions, what should be true in the system before you can actually run this test case?
So for example, what would be the example of test data?
So let's say if I'm kind of trying to create a, I'm trying to do it credit application approval or rejection process, right? So that means I should have a credit application present in that. What is that ID or what that data? And then which lender is going to log in, right? The credentials. So all those information is nothing but the test data. And that's what you put.
Put it on there like that?
Yeah, we'll see it. When we run it now, we'll see it.
All right.
Okay. So let's look at it, right? So everybody remember this page where we talked about what user can do, what kind of activity, right? So let's take a super user, right? And they say, hey, if I need to test this manage user functionality, right? Then one of the things I need to think about is, can super user log into system, right? Then can they do all these tasks, right? That's a simple validation. So now we can break it down multiple things, right? So let's say if I want to log in into any systems, what kind of things I needed, right? So I needed, let's say, so let's say I'm going to, right? So I'm going to have, let's call it a super user itself. I want to test it. Can I log in successfully on a super user or not, right? So whenever you think about any login, right, what do you need? You need a valid
ID.
right? User ID. and password. Right? Now, are you always going to get a valid user ID and a password? Probably not, right? So sometimes you have to deal it and say, hey, what if they don't provide a valid password? Can they still log in or not? Right? You need to probably test it to make sure the security is working as expected, right? So you may have some scenario is, let's say, valid ID and invalid password, right? Another scenario is, what if they give you invalid user ID, right? And if they give you invalid user ID, probably password, whether they give it right or wrong doesn't matter because it should not, right? So another scenario I had is invalid ID. Okay. Now, sometimes you have to test the robustness of the system also, right? So you may say, hey, what if I don't provide any data? And then try to log in to see what happens, right? So now, if you think about it, like just to ensure that like it's my security for logging a super user works properly, I have to think about this 4 different scenarios, right? And make sure I execute each one of the scenarios to do that requirements analysis and requirement validation. Now, let's look at the other angle, right? We said that none of the test cases should be redundant, right? Because it doesn't add a value. So do you feel any one of this is redundant, or each one identifies unique condition that essentially enables me to validate that whether it's super user login functionality is working as expected or not? So in other words, if I just run this, can I guarantee that the super user login is working as expected? Probably not, right? Because I need to validate, hey, what if they give you invalid password? What does system respond? Does it still allow it or it doesn't allow it? Same thing with invalid ID, right? Potentially, you may want to check it out, right? What this is, if you think about it, this is our negative conditions, right? 1, 2, 3 are negative conditions. This is the positive condition. So when I run all those 4 combined, right? 1 positive condition and 3 negative conditions, then I can guarantee that, hey, you know what? The login functionality for this super user is working as expected. Good with this so far?
Yes.
Okay. So think of another way, right? So this is known a lot of times as a tree analysis. Okay. And then when you're doing a tree analysis, right, you may have multiple layers, but think about it, each one of the bottom layer, or what's known as a leaf, should be unique one. That means it gives you a unique condition to test it that goes towards validating that requirement, right? In this case, it's a simple tree, right? I don't have any other layer. It's a simple 4 leaves, right? Now, what happens is each one of this leaf is now a test condition that you need to write a test case for. Okay, so let's take this thing and say, if I have to write a test case, what should I write? Okay, so let's flip to it. So we're going to write it together, right? And says, hey, I have to test a condition where a super user can log in successfully into the system given valid ID and a valid password. Okay. So let's say it's project name, right? So we are working on our flow, right? You can just say, hey, I'm working through the security module. Because if you look at the design document, right, one of the one was security module, and that allows you to log in when then you can go do additional functionality. Right. So you can just say, hey, test is designed by me. Design date is today. Let's say this is the version first. So it's an iteration. So every time you make changes, you essentially bump the version. So you can always relate to, hey, this test was run with this particular specific instructions. And then once you change it, you update it version. So you can always say, what is the history, what changes the test case has gone through it. Okay, right now I'm not executing it anything, so I'm going to leave those two empty, right? The priority is probably I'm going to put it high because if I can't log in as a super user, nothing can happen. Okay. Now let's just use a simple naming standards, but hey, I'm going to do a T for test case and then 0, 1 through whatever the number it comes. Now the title, right? So I can just say its title is validate super user login. It's good enough somebody can understand quickly, hey, what I'm trying to do with. So now let's talk the precondition. Okay. What are you doing? You're trying to validate that super user can successfully log in, right? In order for them super user to successfully log in, right? His account should be existing in the system, right? Everything else, system could be in whatever state, but if his or her account doesn't exist, no matter whatever they put it, they would never should be able to log in, right? So since we are saying that this is the scenario where we're going to validate with the right user ID and a password, so let's put a precondition that, hey, this super user Herschel, is the URL still the same?
It's different, but you can do this one for now.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you want to sit up? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure, hopefully it's better. It's already in your email as well, plus
Yeah.
So
So let's talk, right? So precondition, what you wanted is super user, and then you have to specifically say which one, right? Because that's what we're going to do it. Okay, so hang on, let's not worry about looking where it is right now. Just pay attention here. You will get plenty of time to write it. Because if you don't understand this, having that, it's not going to be useful to you. Okay, so let's look at the precondition. Everybody understood the precondition.
What's asterisk? Is that a random name?
Okay, so remember, like I can't just simply just say it's, hey, super user exists, right?
Yeah.
Because what if there are multiple ones? I need to specify
So it's-
which super user, right? And then all I'm saying is that super user whose user ID is S training existed in the system, right? So let's be more of that, right? Okay, so now I've identified what should be true in the system. So now if I run this test case with system in this particular condition, and if I have a valid user ID and a password for S training, then I should be able to go ahead and execute the test case, right? Dependency, since I'm not going to be dependent on anything external for this one, it's everything is contained within the R flow, right? I'm going to just say it's none, or you can say not applicable. Okay, now let's say test summary. So if somebody just says validate super user login, it's a good, but which one of the 4 scenario I'm running? Right, so I might want to like it's put it a little bit more in the summary. It just says, right? Right. So I gave a description. So like it's when somebody looks at this, oh, you know what? It's one of those 4 conditions, but this specific condition. Good. Yes.
Explain the precondition again, please.
So precondition is, think about it, right? If somebody gives you to test it, right? In order to successfully test it, right? What if that user doesn't exist in the system? Is your test case going to work? Probably not, right? Most likely not, or for certainty it's not going to work, right? Could be one of those conditions depending on what the ID is. But if I do not have that ID in the system, there's no point for me to run the test case, right? Because it's always going to fail. So the precondition usually identifies, hey, what should be true in the system? When I run the test, I have a fair chance to pass the test case. Okay. So, for example, right? Let's say you have a heating system in the house, right? And you said, hey, I need to essentially increase the temperature of the house by 5 degrees, right? So I'm going to turn on the heater and it's going to do that, right? The only thing you can validate it, did it turn up the temperature by 5 degrees or not? If that's what you're trying to test it, what should be true? The first thing you need to do is, hey, my furnace is working or not. If the furnace is not working, no matter how long you keep it, it's never going to raise the temperature, right? So in those scenarios, my precondition would be the furnace is working, right? So now if my furnace is working, then I can check it and just say, if I do it, does the temperature increases by 5 degrees? Same way scenario, right? Whatever system you're trying to test it, what should be the condition of that system before I can execute this test case?
What is S-training?
S-training is just nothing but an ID, right? So what we have done it is in a system, we just said, okay, somebody has to create all the super user, right? Because there is no functionality which says that, hey, you can create a super user, right? When you read through the requirements, you can create all type of users, but not the super user, right? So somewhere the developers has to create that ID so that you can get started in the system. Okay. And all that happens is here, talking to the development team, that just says, yes, we'll create one for you. And here is the ID for that. So we said, okay, so I'm going to assume, because you said that you will create with this ID, I'm going to put that precondition that that is already done in the system before I log into the system, try to validate it. Yes.
So, the precondition, is it an assumption or it's a fact, as an actual?
It's not an assumption, it's actual, right? So,
Determines the test?
yeah,
Is that determinant factor of the test?
if the precondition is not true, like, no matter whether you run the test or not, it will always fail. It will not work.
Most of those you can find in the requirement.
You can find the requirement. Most of the things is going to be in there. Okay. I don't know if any one of you have taken in your high school or that, or recall it like it's right. So in mathematical, right, whenever you're trying to write any functions, the function will always have a precondition, the calculation that you perform in those functions, and then you will have a postcondition, right? So when you're proving all those theorems, right, in the statistical analysis, you will always have those precondition, then the execution of the hypothesis, and then it will be a postcondition. Same way, you're trying to test some functionality, right? It's going to be some precondition. Then you're using system to execute that. And the postcondition is whatever happens after that, right? And then when you execute it, right, you're going to have an expected behavior. What are the outcomes that you're getting? So those outputs is going to be in there. Okay. So precondition is what should be the state of the system. That's it. Nothing else.
I have a question.
Hang on, Deepak, for a moment.
Yes.
You have anything? That's not it.
That's it.
Okay, that's all.
That's the beginning of that. Go ahead, Deepak.
Yes. So for a test case number, so this template is only one. This test template is only for one test, right?
So this document I'm creating is only for one condition. So I may have multiple requirements. This is only doing this condition. That's it. If I
Okay,
have to
but
do this, I'll
is
have to
there
write.
any, yes, is there any possibility for one condition we need to run the test more than one time?
So again, remember what is the criteria for a good test case? It should be repeatable and it should be predictable.
Okay,
And then whenever you do a regression test, what are you doing? You're running existing tests that already passed it.
so
So the
that
goal
time,
is you write the test case such a way that you can run as many times as you need it. And it should get the same result as long as this precondition is always same. Right? And the
yes,
steps that you're following it are exact same. Then you should always get the exact same data as output.
yes. So that time we need to keep the name of the case, not name, the number of the case is the same, but we need to change the version only.
No. So don't worry about the test case number.
Okay,
Don't confuse it. Just leave it empty.
okay,
When you're like it's using online tool, it'll auto generate it. So
okay.
think about it, right? I think it's a good example. Let's say when you create an order at the Amazon, right?
Yes,
I'm going to purchase things. Over the period of time, I will have a different functionality that I'll test it for the purchase, right? I could do it, a functionality where I said, hey, can I purchase only one item? Right? So you can say that's a test case number one. Oh, wait, but I could do the variation where I can put more than one item in my shopping cart and then do that, right? Does more than one item also works? Then the test case that I write it to do that will be a test case number two. Right? Then you can just say, hey, I'm going to try to purchase with invalid payment. That could be my third test case. Do you see it?
yes,
The number, every time you do different things, you will just pump up the test case so that you can uniquely identify that.
okay.
So are we good through here? Any other questions? Okay. So the next thing I have to do it is figure it out step by step things, what I'm going to do it in order to perform this test, right? So typically, whenever you are trying, like it's logging into any systems, what is the first thing you do?
For the sign-in page.
Yeah, see.
You go to the login page, right? Whatever the login page is, right? So that's what first thing we'll do, right? So, and what do? You go into the browser, right? So you can just say in the browser. Right? What do? You enter a URL, right?
Check to see the URL is working.
And for a moment, we'll just say let's say I'm going to put for now TBD because I don't know what URL I'm going to use it yet, right? More like you can't just simply enter, right? You have to perform some action by hitting or clicking go, whatever, depending on whatever the URL, right? So for example, let's just click it go, right? So they put it and then just hit enter, right? You can just see. Now, if I just give it like, hey, this is a 2BD link, can anybody execute it? Probably not, right? They need to know what exactly is the link is going to be. Okay, so that becomes now your test data. Which link I'm going to go to it, right? So you can just say, I can change this, that's enter URL for our flow application. And click enter. So now I know, hey, I have to give this our flow application URL. So I'll go into test data and I'll just say, hey, I'm going to do our flow. Okay. Typically this data for the URL, it's going to be whatever the development team provides. Here is the URL that for your test environment, right? So in our example, okay, copy link. This is the URL that the development team has provided for our teams. Okay, so now I have this data. So now I put that. So you go put it. What should you expect as expected results? Right. So the page should open that in the browser, right? So you can just say it's right. Right. It's good. Okay. What is the next thing you're going to do? Now that you are at the home page. Right. So you can just say it's enter. Right. You can say. Right, because entering is not sufficient. You have to go and click it, right? So if you start seeing a pattern, I have to perform some action before I could expect the results, right? Not only just entering the data, but then initiating some action. So in both the cases here, I click the enter, here, I'm going to click the login button, right? So now I have some additional sets of data, right? Super user ID and a password I need to provide it to log in, right? So I'll just go in the data section, right? I can just say it's user ID and then password. Now remember, user ID, we identify that in the our precondition, right? It's going to be S training. And the password is all the default password, whatever the system sets up for you, right? And let's say, to simplicity of word, we just set it up a password as training, right? So now this start, do you see how I'm building my test data section? What do I need it in order to perform this function or this task? Where do I get the data and start putting into the data section? Okay. What should happen? How do I know I was able to log in? So I need some sort of confirmation, right? So the normal confirmation is what's going to happen. I expect, since I'm provided valid user ID and password, that the super user is successfully logged in the system. And the way I know that he or she is successfully logged in, because it pulls up a home page for that. So if you remember the design, right? Super user login, there is a home page, and then that. So I know if home page that is designed for super user shows up, then I know not only he logged in, but he is actually logged in as a super user, right? So you put it in that, right? Let's see. Make sense? Right. So I'm expecting two action, right? When I do this, the first behavior is it's going to successfully log in me into the system. And the second segment is now once it's successfully logged in, it's displaying it. So that should be happening. Okay. What is the next step?
output system homepage will show.
Well, but that's what this showed up, right? What is my next step?
If the password is wrong. Oh, no. We are just looking for.
Remember,
something. Sorry.
That's what it goes at.
Yeah.
Even though there are 4 conditions, I'm testing only for this one condition. Okay. So at this point, am I logged into the system? Right? Did I finish validating whatever the scope of the requirement is? Right? So I'm done with the test case, right? So now I don't need to do a third step, right? So I can just say, hey, I'm done. Okay. So I know I'm done with the 2 steps. That's going to do it. I identify all the test data, I identify all the expected results. Now I need to identify the post condition. What is the post condition going to be?
Successfully logged in.
Right. So at this point, right, the state of the system is this particular user is successfully logged into the system as that, and he's logged in because I haven't said to log out type of thing, right? So, spell it. That's it. Okay. My status is, since I haven't executed it, this is the state that I am in, right? I just planned it. I haven't run anything. Right? And I don't have any specific notes, so I'll just say there's no notes.
What do you,
Yes.
the last few actual results, we need to.
So-
identify.
Remember, all I'm doing is I'm still in the design phase, right? There is no software.
Mhm.
Right? All I'm just saying is that if there is a software, this is what I will run. This is what I would expect all the results. And then once you get that software and you start executing the test cases, at that point, you will just go into say, hey, let me do this. What actually I'm seeing it. That's what I will capture in actual results at that time. Right? So in the planning phase, you're never going to see anything for actual results, but you should see it clearly what is expected here. Right? So that's, in a nutshell, your test case. Okay. Now, here, let me just say it. So I'll just say it's because I could run different scenario, right? So I need to distinguish. So I'm just going to say valid. So that's the test case. Now, if I have to do the second one, right? Now things becomes easier because in this case, most of the things that I'll run it will be more or less same with the exception of the invalid password, right? So in this case, right, since I'm throwing invalid password, more or less of everything will remain the same. So here's what I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually duplicate this. I'm going to just essentially call this invalid. Right, let's say, hey, this is the scenario, right? In this case, so I'm gonna keep it this as same. Right, because that's what I'm expecting as a behavior. And my first step is going to be the same, right? The second step is probably going to same, but my data is going to change it, right? let's say, I'm just going to, right, let's say it's, hey, I'm not going to provide the valid password that they provided, but something else than that, right? So just says, right? So typically you're going to see it, some sort of message, right? And if you look at it from security purpose, they never tell you whether you have an invalid user ID or invalid password, right? They just say, hey, this combination is not valid, right? So that's what I would expect it to be here, right? Then I got all of this data, right? So all I would just say is, right? So nothing has changed from what it was before and after. So that's it. So now I'm done with the second test case.
So,
Right, so I'm done with this as well as with this test case. Yes,
There, like, do you know what exact error message will be displayed, like invalid password?
so all at this point, right, which says there should be some error message indicating that it failed, right? So in the planning phase, you can write like this. And then as the system is getting designed, you can have a conversation with development team. It says, hey, what kind of messages you will display when this thing happens? Sometimes it may be specified in the requirements. Sometimes it may be whatever the standard the company is using it to display whenever things fail. Okay, so that's the message. But here I'm just putting it, hey, at a minimum, I'm looking for these two things. Yes.
so the test case is negative, but your expectation when it happens, it's just successful, right?
It's a negative test scenario. If I fail to log in, the test case is passed
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. because it showed the expected behavior.
Yes.
So whenever your actual result and expected behaviors are same for every steps, then you pass the test case because you got what you expected.
This is good.
Good so far?
I have a question. Maybe it is not exactly related to this one. So in so many websites, when we try to log in for 3 or multiple times, system locks out on us. So does that scenario come under this search user, like a login user, or it is a case of a completely security site?
Well, so that will be an additional requirements, right? So when you look into the current requirements, it never says anything about getting user locked out,
Okay.
right? So if your system requirement calls it that after 3 unsuccessful login attempts, user ID should be locked, then again, you can have that message. A lot of times you do not get a message that, hey, your user ID locked, right? It just says you exceeded unsuccessful attempts and that's it. Right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a duration, right? That, hey, you can't log in for another hour or another day. Sometimes, depending on the security requirement, they may say, hey, you know what, you're locked out. You'll call a help desk to essentially go ahead and reset your password before you can proceed to log in anymore. So it's again, goes back to, is those things defined in the system requirement or not?
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you guys understand how I took a requirement, broke it down into different possible test cases, right? And then wrote a step-by-step instruction for that. So that's the process that you will have to master it and repeat over and over again, because that's essentially in a nutshell all of your quality assurance activity. Okay. see if somebody's messaging. Okay. So Harshal has sent all of you a test case template in the email, so you can access it. Any questions before we proceed for you guys to practice it? Do you understand how you go about it? Now, if you think about it, right? This, show a different color. So this becomes your test scenario. All you're trying to do it is login scenario for super user, right? And each one of this 4 things becomes your test cases, which are part of that scenario. Okay, so get used to that term. You're going to have scenario is a bigger construct, and then each specific detail will be the test cases. So let's do one together, and then we'll give you requirements to do the tree analysis. So Harshal, which one do you want to pick it?
Go to the email.
You logged in?
Open the browser. Open the tab.
This one?
Yep. Just open that.
You want to take this one?
Yeah, we can.
So which is that one?
Open one.
Yeah. I'm trying so, this is my requirement. Okay. So remember what the first step, let me start drawing tree. So you guys tell me if this is the requirement that you're trying to test it. What are the different possible paths?
The same thing, go to the browser page.
No, that's you're talking about the steps, not steps. Remember the tree that I drawn it for the invalid user ID password, valid user ID? If I have to break that one into multiple pieces, what will I break it down?
One will be
It will be a valid first name,
the first name and last name.
last name, then the combination of
Valid.
all. Yep.
What are you going to validate
Like
against?
I'm looking for the word.
Means if
Because
all-
name can be anything.
Valid name or not? Is that what you're talking about here?
Based on their name, based on the user.
Okay, so
whatever data is provided to us based on those.
what is the data? So you can't just throw a statement, whatever the data is provided to us.
Uh,
You're
name-
telling what data and what condition you want to test it for.
If it is for any name, then we cannot test for the valid name. But if it is like combination of other than any like data type,
Step back, hang on, just step back. What did you understand from this requirement? Tell me that.
I understood the validation of the
time.
name, the first
One
name and the
person at a
last.
time. One person at a time. Okay, so that everybody else can understand. So go ahead, Shushri, you were saying something.
Yeah, is the combination of the first name and the last name, and it should be defined like if it is, it should not be numeric.
Okay. Again, my question is, what do you understand from this requirement?
Can I say?
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
From this user is already in the system by somebody. Somebody put the user's information in the system, and system will generate that username based on the.
Hang on to that. I'll have further follow-up question for you. So I understand where you're going. Hang on to that. Go ahead, Dhanashree. You were saying something?
I was saying the username has to be generated with the first name and last name. If in my case, like Dhanashree Suryavanshi, so it should has to be like Dhanashree Suryavanshi @ whatever the site name is.
Okay,
That will
but
be-
you're just rephrasing it, what it's written here. So tell me, what did you understand from the requirements? You were
I
saying,
was exactly going to say the same thing, but it can have some max limit, so it can just
Okay.
take the first four
Okay.
letters any combination.
what do you, cardinal rule of you as a quality assurance is you do not come up with your own requirements. Is there a max number identified anywhere in the requirements?
No,
Why are you coming with that? You're changing what user wants it to what you think user wants it. Go ahead.
We should just enter first name or last name or with empty boxes and we can test.
Let's get back into the context. Okay. Let me ask the same question different way. When do you think this requirement is going to come into the play? While user is being created, right? So it's not the user already exists in the system. Somebody is trying to create a user, right? At that point, they will provide some data elements. And all this requirement says is that, hey, based on that data, the username which they will use it further to log in the system in future should be generated based on their first name and last name. Everybody understood where it's coming from? Okay. So what that means, I need to make sure I have two pieces of data called first name and a last name while they're providing that information to create the user. Right. So now that you know that, hey, I need to think in that context and I need to have this, what are the different possible combinations you have to deal with? Right. I'll give you the first one, hint, right? So my first name and last name is provided. Okay. So think about it. They are creating a user, but they don't put anything for the first name and last name. Can you auto-generate it? Do you have to test that for that possibility? Right, so that's one possibility. So Deepal, does that answer where you were going before?
Yes.
Okay. What are the different other scenarios?
Only first name with no last name.
Okay, so. Okay, what are the other? You say that only last name is provided. Okay, you say it's no first name or last name provided. Okay.
And can we put one more here? What if the same exact name and last name entered before?
Ah. For example, Bob Smith, right? All right. Any other possible scenarios you guys can think about?
Doesn't matter.
How do I know what your name spelling is?
That's true.
So can I group this three as
Completed.
incomplete data? Right? Okay. So potentially you can think about it as that, hey, I have a valid data, invalid data, and valid data scenario is this, as well as this potentially falls under valid data. Right. So you can potentially like start thinking about, hey, actually this thing has a multiple layers, right? It's a grouping, but then when I further click it, here are the three bottom lines. Right. Now let me ask a question. Do you feel you need to run all these 5 test cases in order to test it? Yes. Do you feel there is anything redundant here? So let me ask a question. For incomplete data, if I ran this successfully and this successfully, do I need to run this thing? It's going to give me any other validation or any other information.
Just to make sure.
Okay, I would love to make everything sure. Do I need it? What value am I adding it? So it's kind of like it's, hey, if I'm doing addition 2 plus 2, I have to do 2 plus 2, then I have to do 2 plus 3, do I have to do 2 plus 4, just to make sure the calculator works perfectly. Are you going to do those infinite number of test cases? Right? And at that point, what value you're adding for every incremental test case? Do you see where I'm going? In order to test requirements, it'll be nice. This is a comprehensive set of all 5 things. But one of them is redundant that I did not have to worry about running it if the other ones are already working as expected behavior. Right? The scenario in the user ID password was different, right? It was, hey, it's a missing data, right? Versus invalid data. Here, the missing data is 3 condition. I broke it down. And since it's only 2 fields, I can, if I validate each one of them individually, I don't have to worry about combination. Because as long as, if it doesn't allow it to be created, first name is missing, in this case, it's going to be happening exact same. If it doesn't allow me with the last name missing, it's going to happen exact same thing. So this is potentially a redundant test cases for me, right? Sorry, I can smell. Make sense? So if I take this requirement and I get into this 4 conditions, then I can test it. Okay. Now let's talk about the expected behaviors. Okay. Do I know what will be the behavior if they give you a first name and last name, which was not existing in the system? Probably I know it, right? The other point is, if I have the first name and last name, all it just says username is auto-generated based on this name. Is it the first name, comma last name, or first name, last name? So if I have a Bob Smith, is my user ID is going to be generated as Bob Smith? Is it Smith Bob? Right? Is it B Smith? Is it Smith B? Do I know which one of those will generate? Yes, no?
No, it says auto generator.
Ah, so what does that mean?
So again, maybe it is depend on the developers who wants to give the unique ID. Depend on the first name, 3 letters of the first name and the 3 letters of the last name, or and so on. It depends on the code who decided
So
what
people
what
is, I don't care what user wanted. What business wanted, I don't care. My developer is going to decide what they want. Right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Developing team will decide the code.
So let's say if you're building a house, you want a 4-bedroom house. And the contractor decided, yeah, I know you wanted a 4-bedroom house. I'm going to just build a 2-bedroom house for you. Right? That's good for you, right?
No.
No.
Why not?
No.
Why not?
That's not the requirement.
You want a 4-bedroom
Why
house,
would
and
you
that's
let
the
the
requirement.
developer decide what should be the username and the password? Because you put a condition right there. Definitely my user wanted some criteria of how the user ID is going to generate it. You were saying something.
I was saying it will not create, if it's the Bob Smith already exists in the system, it will not create
Again,
the
I'm
same.
not even worried about that scenario.
Okay.
I'm saying is that Bob Smith doesn't exist in the system.
Yeah, but
What
it
should
will
it
not
generate?
create the same auto generator. It will create the same different combination.
Who decides what combination will generate?
Should be.
Business.
The system.
The system should decide. Remember, there's no magic. At least the programming that I've been doing in the last 30 years, there's no magic. Somebody makes that decision and puts into the code.
If the user does not specify anything, maybe the developer decides.
It goes back to it. I want a 4-bedroom house. Since you didn't say it, whether you want it in 2 different story, I'm going to decide that you just need a 2-bedroom house. That's what you're saying to me.
When the business people say I want a 4-bedroom, that's where they are specifying they need 4.
But they say it's specifying here too, right? I want a username to be generated based on first name and last name.
They did not say how many letters from the first
Ah.
name and how many from the last.
Business page.
Okay, so hang on to that thought. You were saying something, Shruti.
No, I was saying that.
Okay. So they didn't say it. What did you do when you did 3C and T? What is one of the C? Correct is that.
Correct, complete,
Complete.
And consistent.
They told you
consistency.
something this. Did they complete it? Did they specify exactly how they want it? Right? So if you write it and somebody generates a B Smith versus somebody generates Smith B, right? The user looks at it and says, no, I don't want it that. I wanted the Bob Smith, the whole thing. Right? Now, are you going to be on the same page as user? You're not. So you have a requirement, but you don't have a complete understanding how you're going to validate that. You don't know what the expected behavior should be. Right? You don't know which one of this 4 needs to be there. So you have to go back to user and says, wait a minute, I understand you want a combination, but can you tell me what you had in your mind? Let's talk with some examples so that I understand what exactly you wanted, right? So we'll treat Harshal as the business user here. And so I'll go back and says, Harshal, when you say it, username should be auto-generated based on a first name and last name. Can you tell me what you had in mind? Let's take an example. Bob Smith. Bob is first name, Smith is last name. What do you think it should be generated?
So it should be Smith. That's how it should be.
Okay, so you're saying it's the first letter
Yep.
of the first name and then entire last name?
And that was-
Okay. So I need it like it's first letter. Okay. Now that the Harshal has specified that clarification, I know when I'm trying to do, sorry, this one, I have to use that combination, right? So every time I get the user ID and a first name and a last name for that, I will know exactly what to generate.
So, sorry. So Harshal is the customer, right? So how does he have a choice to make the username?
Who is paying for it?
He's the business.
Who is paying
He's
for the system,
business? Okay,
right?
yeah, I know.
I don't the money, so.
Harshal is the one who's gonna pay it. So if I don't listen to him, goes back to the house
No,
example.
No, I was saying customer.
I would love you to be a customer who says, you build whatever you wanted
No,
and I'll still pay you.
You just misunderstood me. You just keep talking about it. That's not what I mean.
What do you mean?
I mean customer as the user, like
Yeah,
he's customer, I went down farther than him. But he's buying the software to use for his client. Now I get it.
No, I'm not.
doesn't matter, client. He is the one who is paying it to build this system. So how the system should be built, should be now whether he uses or he sells it to somebody
Yeah.
else, I don't care.
Somebody is a customer. Again.
Right, I don't care, right? For me, Harshal is my customer. He's paying for me to build it. So I'm gonna go whatever he says. Now, how he uses afterwards,
You don't care.
that's not my, I don't care,
All right, thank you.
right? So you guys good?
Now I'm good.
So you guys, do you think that requires?
So we
Yes.
are saying that Harshal decides on what the first and last name was to generate it should be.
Yeah, so all I'm just saying is, I don't know how to generate it. So I went back to the user and says, can you give me an example and clarification?
Okay.
So we started having a conversation so that we got the clarity is what it should be. Right, so earlier it was incomplete requirement. He provided some additional things that helps me to make it expected behavior clearly outlined in my test case.
Okay. Thank you.
Good. Now, do you guys feel it's complete? Do you feel the requirement is complete?
What if they're multiple with the same first name and last name?
Ah. So what if you run into this scenario, right? If there are two Bob Smith. Okay, and the first one was already created as B Smith. And I try to create the second user with the B Smith. Should I be able to create it? What should it generate? So let's go back, ask it. So Harshal, there will be a scenario where there'll be two people in the system with the same first name and last name. What should we do at that point?
So it should add a number at the end. So it should add a sequential.
Ah, so if I have another Bob Smith,
Yes, so it should start with B Smith 1 or B Smith 2, something like that.
so I do B Smith, do I do 1 or do I 0, 1, 0, 0, 1?
Yep, 2. Start with the second one would be 2. So there is already a B Smith in the system, it will put 2.
Put B Smith 2, it will not do B Smith 1, okay. And this number will increment it
Yep.
every time it does it, right? So it'll go to 3, 4, etc.
Yep.
Okay. So now you know it, what should be expected for this thing. Right? If you say it's, so I have to worry about making sure, does system check it when somebody try to recreate the similar first name and last name user to do that? Right? What if I create third one? Will it still do 2 or it'll do 3? Those are my boundary conditions that I need to validate. Right? Yes, good. So now, can I identify the behavior for each one of the test scenarios? Right? I can clearly articulate for each one of the scenarios what should be there. There is no ambiguity now. I don't know what it'll generate. It's whatever the developer says. No. Does the system generate based on whatever the user identified in the requirement? So I can clearly outline all of my test cases and says, can I successfully say, yes, it's doing, or no, it's not doing it. So at this point, my requirement is complete. Right? So my 3C and a T, it's done. Right? Think about it, right? What does this analysis help you? The developer hasn't written a single piece of code yet, right? You prevented from a whole bunch of problems that he had to go back and fix it later, because you applied that 3 CNT, made sure you understand what each one of those conditions would mean. Okay. So you take a requirement. Remember when I say it's, when you read the document, apply 3 CNT. This is what you should be doing. Okay. Understand what other scenarios is going to be. Do I know exactly what should happen in every scenario? Okay. Any questions on this one? Can we keep it that canvas as is? Yes, good? Yes.
I'm having hard time to imagine that same person, first and last name with the second. 2, 3, like, can you give me an actual example, like how it will be?
So remember, like it's, you're gonna have a manage user component where they're gonna create a user, right? So a dealership is gonna have a whole bunch of people working at their place. Okay. Another dealership is gonna have another sets of people working at their place. So I could have a Bob Smith working in that. I'll give an example. Let's give my own example, right? When I look in Chase, there are 2 Dilipatels working, right? And our email address gets generated based on first name and last name. Well, what should be the email address gets generated? Right? So the rule that they put it is, okay, if you have a middle name, we'll put insert another set of tokens in the middle to go that. If you don't have that, then they will just say it's X and then the number in the email. So they define that rule, right? The 2 Dilipatels, and now when they create an account for us, the email addresses, there is a distinct way we know exactly what it will be generated. Right? Same thing here. If there is a Bob Smith working in one dealership, and there is a Bob Smith working in second dealership, the system is going to still have the same users, right? Because your users are associated with the dealership, but your usernames are independent across the whole system. So the first one will get generated with B Smith. The second dealer, when they hire somebody else known as Bob Smith, and they try to create an account, the system will check it. Hey, there's already B Smith existing in the system. So the username that I'm going to generate this time is going to be Smith too. Okay. And then ideally, your screen, when you're trying to create that user, should tell it, hey, the user with this user ID generated. So that tells you what was generated. Now that's where you need to be careful with the preconditions, right? When you're testing this scenario, you need to make sure, hey, there is already a user in the system with this exact first name, last name. So then you can run it and say, okay, now it's there. Because if there's no user exist, then it should generate B Smith, not B Smith too. Now, what happens if there's already 2 Bob Smiths? Right. The other aspect is also going to be, doesn't have to be exactly. What if there is a name is Brad Smith? Based on this logic, it'll still be a B Smith. Right? So should bump it up to that. So that's the key, putting those requirements and then putting those definitions, right? So ideally, if you want to test this properly, right, you can have further more breakdown of this thing, right? And since it's only the same last name and the first character of the first name is same, an exact same first name, last name, right? Those are the 2 possible scenarios you can test it. And make sure the number gets incremented. Okay. So think of this, right? You have that simple requirements. You have to break it down into 5 different scenarios, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, but this one has 2 subsets, right? So there are 5 test cases that you can generate. So you will write 5 such templates that I wrote it for the super user login. Okay. Any questions? All right. So this is what I would like it. Or shall you already send it out then the email, right?
Yeah, so with the same, they require.
Yeah.
To the
Okay, so I'm going to leave it up here on the screen. Okay. And what I would like all of you just take a pen and pencil, right? Or use a PowerPoint, whatever you needed to do online. I want you to spend probably 10 minutes each. So it's 10:17. Let's include the break and everything, and then come back together at 10:40 or 10:45. Let's do it 10:45 so you get good time. I want you to think about 2.9 and 1.2 requirements, and then build a tree like this for that. Okay, did everybody understand what needs to be done? Okay, so you take this two requirements, which is the password must be 8 characters, and then each dealer must be assigned a unique franchise number. Break it down into how many test cases you think you need to write it for each one of them. Okay. Everybody good? All right.
the requirements are also in the email, so. Someone.
Yeah. I'm gonna just leave it up here for now while I'm there, so you can see it in the share. What exactly we are doing it and what requirements you need to work through.
Dilip, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So is it like we have to think about 2 templates only, one for the 2.9 and another for the 1.2?
Yeah, remember, like I drew one for the valid super user login, remember?
Right.
And it's my second one. So for every requirement, which in this case, you have 2 requirements, you draw individual trees.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So do we need to use the Excel template you just sent it to us?
No, just do it on a blank piece of paper,
Oh, okay, okay. Thank you.
right? You're not writing the test cases yet.
We are just
Okay.
making the tree, right?
Yeah, you're just making the tree.
Okay.
Okay, so we can do it in the notebook. Thank you.
Yeah. But again, if you're doing it on a notebook, you might want to take a picture. So when I'm going to ask everybody to share it, so you can share it in the Zoom.
Yes, yes, definitely. Okay.
All right. So, and then we'll include the break in between with that because we are kind of almost an hour and a half into the lesson. Okay. All right. Pause the recording. Yeah. So now if you think about it, right? At the start, right? If I'm like it's greater than 8 characters or less than 8 characters, there is no need to proceed any further. As soon as you do, you're good, right? You should throw it away as invalid password. If it is 8 characters, then I can do a uppercase or no uppercase. If it is no uppercase, I'm going to reject it as invalid password, right? If there is an uppercase and a special characters, then I'm going to accept it. If it's uppercase and no special character, I'm going to reject it, right? So now if you think about, right, so compared to here, right, where everything was flat, now you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if I do those 5 test cases, I'm going to cover every possible scenarios, right? So that this becomes a leaf, this becomes a leaf, this, and this. So here are the 5 different possible, right? And the way you write it is, this is the first condition, right? This is the second condition. So when you write the test case, you need to make sure that every step covers this pieces of information, right? The third one is this. Don't tell me, Herschel, it's crashed.
It should be able to open. It should be there.
It should be there. Where's?
Just type in whiteboard.
Oh, perfect. It's on cloud, huh? Okay. So the third one is this scenario. Right? So did everybody get it? How we came across this? So now you have 5 test cases that you can write it to validate it, whether whatever the password user entered it, is it a valid password or not? Okay, Nilima, does this make sense? From a viewpoint? Like what you were doing, it was after entering the password, right? Versus this is, did the password meet that criteria or not?
So the SC is what,
Special character.
okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead and box this thing. And this. Okay, so it's good. So for this requirement, this is what it is, right? So you can see it. That's the tree.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
This like if else kind of statement, will the test case number or the ID will be cascading or something relating to the previous?
So this is just one test case, whatever I drew it in the blue. There is no separate thing.
So they're not related.
Right, so you just put it, the first step, does the password 8 characters? Yes, go to the next step. Is there a unique uppercase in there? That, at least one. Yes, good. Move to the third one. This. As long as it happens, then you're done. That's one test case.
You probably want to write this as a like password has to be password is 8
Right.
characters, contains one uppercase
And a
one
lowercase.
special character.
Yeah.
Okay. That's how you can write in the test description.
Yeah.
For that.
Good. Should I move into the other one? Okay. So the second one talks about each dealership must be assigned auto-generated unique franchise number. So let's get it, somebody from online. Do you want to share?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing it. I'm going to, it should be fine now. So people, you want to go ahead and share?
Yes. One is
Go ahead
valid.
and share your screen so they can see it.
Oh, I couldn't do it. That's why I emailed Herschel about it. I couldn't
Okay.
share any document here.
No, so click on a share screen. So when you maximize your Zoom window, at the bottom, there is a share screen option.
Yes, but it says host disable the participant screen sharing.
Try now.
Okay, let me just do it.
All participants.
Yeah.
You
can
should be
see.
able. You should be able to share now. There you go.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
So first one is a valid number, which is from the requirement, 2-digit from the state, 2-digit from the county, and auto-generated number. The second scenario is the
Can you zoom in, Deepak? Can you zoom in a little bit so that everybody can see it?
yes.
There you go. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay.
first scenario is everything is valid. The 2-digit state, 2-digit county, and auto-generated number.
Okay, so it's a 2-digit state. I think it's 2 or 3-digit county.
it's a first digit state, 2-digit of a county, and 3-digit of auto-generated number from the requirement.
Okay.
The second scenario is 2 same digit, but the different state, and 2 same digit with 2 different counties, and auto-generated number, which is exactly the same. I put the example here, TE for Texas and Tennessee, and the CO for the Collin County and Tennessee Cook County, and the same auto-generated number. And the third one, I didn't, I guess, write it correctly here, but the different state, but the different county, but the first 2 digits are exactly the same and the number is the same. And the third one, I guess I wrote it wrong, but everything is the different here.
So let me step back here, right? So when is this requirement is going to be coming into the picture? When it's going to get executed?
When they prepare the requirement.
Create what? When they create dealer, right?
Yes.
Yes.
When they create dealer, that's when this is going to come into the picture. And just like last name, right? You're talking about the 2 pieces of information that they need to provide, right? Instead of first name and last name, here you're looking at the state and account information, right?
Yes.
So when you look into it, when you say auto-generated, so think of the combinations from that viewpoint, right? You have to validate that one, I can generate it using state and county information. Second thing I have to validate is if the state and county is same, does the third component gets auto-generated to increment to whatever it is. Remember how we had B Smith and Smith B, right? You can almost exactly replicate the similar tree here. If you think for a moment, right? Did they provide state information? Yes or no? Right? Did they provide county information? Yes or no?
Yes.
Those 2 are incomplete data, right? And if they provide complete data, then you have 2 cases. One is there is no dealer exist with that county and that state, so that it will generate 001. And the second aspect is there already dealer exists in that county and the state. So then does it generate the next number, right? So those are the 4 basic criteria, which is the same way people that you have laid it out, right? But you have to think it a little bit differently.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right, so if I go back to here, I'm going to take away the screen share. Right, and I'm going to go back to my whiteboard. You remember this thing? Mhm.
Yeah, now we can.
Right? So it's the same thing, right? Here is state and the county. Right, so this state and county will be here. Same state and a county here. And these 2 cases will be incomplete data, right? If they don't provide a state or if they don't provide the county. Yes.
So in the requirement, they did not mention the state and county in there. So-
Not in this requirement, right? But remember, when we say it, when you read the requirements document, right? It's incomplete here. So you have to look at it. Is there anywhere else in the document that additional detail is provided? Which is there, right? So when you look into the actual managed dealer in section 261, I believe. 261. Right? So in that section, there is a detail provided for you. So that's the key thing that you need to look at it, right? It's not necessarily, hey, if it's not provided here, and if it's provided somewhere else, then it's still good, right? Because you can combine all that information because user has provided that. Now, if it's not present anywhere else, then that's when you start asking questions. Or if this contradicts to something else that's already in the document, then you question.
Yeah, the requirement right below this one, they have provided the calculation.
Right.
They will be calculating franchise.
Yes.
But in the design, system design document, county field is, they mentioned it's not required.
So again, we're yeah, so that's things that you should flag it, right? So if they don't provide a county, can you generate an auto franchise number? You can't, right? So you reject it and says that, hey, this system fails, right? So they may have to put that condition that, hey, does it require me to enter? Right? Now it's two different things, right? It doesn't require versus if I don't enter it, right? So if they're saying it's an optional, that's fine, but the optional will not allow you to generate it. So you must provide that data. So that's the requirement consistency flag. Yes.
So in this scenario, it's an existing functionable system already. So assuming all the dealer shops out in the system, and then when the new dealer is assigned, then it's going to generate it for the special number, right?
Right.
So it's already functional. And so when you put the dealer in the shop or whatever show that you pick, because it's already in existence, and then the county and
Sorry, you lost me there. So,
yeah.
so what is your question? Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so my question is on this requirement that we are doing, since we did not request the, I don't use the word assumption, but this is what I did. So based on what on the requirements, I know that it's already a functional system.
Again, remember, you are validating that system does that. It's not, don't assume that it's already there in the system.
Okay.
You're validating, does the system show this requirement as an implemented?
Okay.
And that's what you're trying to test it. Okay. So everybody on board, did everybody understood how the tree will come for the second one also, right? So it'll be more or less kind of exact same, right? The only difference is, right? This is going to be state plus county. Okay. State plus county existing, right? So that's already a dealer with that. And there is no state information. And then there is no county information. So those are the four basic test cases that you need to do it in order to prove this thing. Okay, everybody good? Okay. So here is things. Now, all of you have a template that Harsh will send it out, right, for the test case. Like this one that we filled out, right? And for those who are in the classroom, there should already be one in your binder when you start the exercise, right? So right after the PowerPoint slides, you have a blank one. I think it's the second or third page in the second tab. I don't go that far. Just flip only the PowerPoint slides. Right, it's the third page right there. You have a blank one. Okay, so what I want all of you to do it is now take the requirements that we talked about, and I'm going to show it up here. Okay. Okay. So I want everybody to write the detailed test case for this scenario. where you're validating the username can get auto-generated when there is already a user with a same first name and a last name. Okay? So write a test case for this particular scenario that I'm kind of drawing in the green. Everybody understood? So you're writing for this scenario, you're writing the detailed test case like what we had done it in the classroom. Okay, and all of you should have either electronic template or a physical copy of the template here. Okay, so we'll give you, it's 11:10. We'll give you about 20 minutes to go till 11:30 to write that test case.
Which one you give them?
I gave them the creating a username based on if there is already an existing first name and last name. And so it should go ahead and like it's increment the count by 1, right? So like it's B Smith, Bob Smith 1 and 2. You're saying something?
I'm thinking, leave the first one.
This one you're talking about?
If they can get it right. then-
Okay.
then they could do that.
Okay, so let's do that. So as Herschel said, right? Write for this one first. But once you're done with this, you can write the second one, right? So just write this one first. This one is second.
You can leave the first one here.
Okay. So you get 20 minutes to write the first one, which is the first name and last name is provided, and based on that, you are validating the username is generated properly. Okay.